Starting us off at number 10, Bannack, Montana, USA. So Bannack was founded in 1862 when John White discovered gold on Grasshopper Creek. 2 years later, it became the first territorial capital of Montana before it changed to Virginia City. At its peak, it had a population of 10,000 people. You know, quite a bit for back then. But the sheriff was accused by some of leading the ruthless band of road agents called the Innocents. Early accounts claim the gang was responsible for the murders of over 100 innocent people, though historical records account for about 8. So it's kind of iffy. The sheriff and 2 deputies were hanged without trial in Bannack in 1864. 22 individuals were accused, informally tried, and hung by the Vigilance Committee, which is the Montana Vigilantes, of Bannack and Virginia City. So the city kept going into the 1930s with a fluctuating population, but then, in the 50s, gold workings dwindled, and then Bannack was declared a state park. The last residents left in the 70s. So all that with the Wild West, and then it's a state park now. Kinda funny. On to number 9, St. Elmo, Colorado, USA. So St. Elmo is the best preserved ghost town in all of Colorado, and it boasts the most hauntings and paranormal activity of any ghost town in the state. So it was settled in 1878 as Forest City and officially became St. Elmo in 1880. It was a gold mining settlement, just like many on this list, and the Mary Murphy mine recovered over $60 million worth of gold while it was in operation. It's just a lot of gold. But it's not a complete ghost town right now since it is privately owned with part-time inhabitants as of right now. You could even say the ghosts there are part-time inhabitants too. The most famous one is Dirty Annie. Her real name was Annabelle Stark, but she got her nickname Dirty Annie after her mother passed away. Annie and her brother were left to run the hotel their mother used to run while their father was in the mines. Since their mother was harsh and strict on cleanliness, after her passing, Annie would walk around in filthy clothing with her hair in a mess as a form of quiet rebellion. But anyways, some people say they have still seen her walking around the town, just strutting her stuff, hair a mess, filthy clothes. And then those who inherited the hotel swear the hotel went cold and all of the doors slammed shut when their grandchildren were playing inside. So could that have been Dirty Annie as well? Just toying with the kids? Number 8, Bodie, California, USA. So this ghost town sprung up after William Bodie hit gold in 1859. Then from 1877 to 1882 it had more than 10,000 residents and produced over 35 million in gold and silver. Also, at one point there were reported to be 65 saloons in town in addition to brothels, gambling halls, and opium dens. Like, it was the Wild West after all, but that's a lot of saloons. But sometimes that mix of money, gold, and alcohol would lead to unexpected fatalities. Newspapers reported that townspeople would ask in the mornings, "Have we a man for breakfast?" I don't know how to do a southern accent. Anyways, that meant, did anyone get killed last night? Because that's just how it was there. But not anymore. Now there are over 200 abandoned wooden buildings in what is Bodie State Historic Park. The buildings are not restored, but preserved. So you can go see a little bit of the Wild West yourself if you want. Number 7, Cerro Gordo, California, USA. So silver was discovered in Buena Vista Peak in 1865. Its discovery brought in miners, but also unsavory characters. At one point, the death rate was 1 person per week. There was no sheriff for miles around, and even the doctor fled the town, scared for his life. Basically, it had a reputation for death. So once Union Mine closed down in 1938, the population also died down. As of right now, there is one resident, Robert de Moraes, who is coincidentally a former miner. He serves as the town's unofficial caretaker. Number 6, Cahalba, Alabama. Cahalba became a ghost town shortly after the Civil War. It was once the capital, but that title was taken away. What is really interesting to me is its ghost, Peague's ghost. In 1862, the story goes that a young couple was out for a walk on a moonlit night. Romantic. As they walked behind Colonel C.C. Peake's house, a glowing ball of white light seemingly just appeared before them. It was just floating on the air. This ball would dart first on one side of the walk and then on the other, and then approach close enough to almost touch them, and then recede and disappear into the shrubbery. And then suddenly it was seen beside them floating again. So they thought the apparition was a trick or something fancy, maybe caused by the same peculiar phase of moon shadows, something like that. So they turned to retrace their steps, and then it happened again and appeared in front of them. Went through the same thing. So at this point, the man and his lady determined to test the materiality of the object, but then he tried to grab it, and then it darted just beyond his reach, disappeared, saw not again. Other people have seen it, and the glowing light, will-o-wisp, or whatever it was, from then on was known as Peague's ghost. Number 5, Kennecott, Alaska, USA. Up and to the left in Alaska is Kennecott. It was once a thriving 20th century copper mining town, and it is now desolate. From 1911 to 1938, Kennecott employed as many as 300 people in the mill town and 300 in the mines. It process nearly $200 million worth of copper, but once the copper tapped out, the company that established the town quickly withdrew from the settlement. Kennecott Copper Corporation left abruptly and left behind their equipment, buildings, and belongings. So now the National Park Service and tour operators offer guided access to several historic buildings, including the 14-story concentration mill. That'd be something fun to see, I think. In that mill, they apparently talk about the tales of lucky fortunes, frontiersmen, and tragic endings that occurred in the remote wilderness. Number 4. Shakespeare, New Mexico, USA. Shakespeare was an old mining town that was frequented by outlaws. It was called Mexican Springs first, then Grand, and then became Ralston City when it was a mining town in 1870. When the silver started running low, the population began to run low as well. But then in 1879, before it was about to be a ghost town first time, most of the land in the city was bought by Colonel William G. Boyle. He gave the town a new start under the name Shakespeare. So apparently Billy the Kid washed dishes at a hotel there, and 2 notorious cattle raiders were captured and hung. The records state that the 2 were hung because Russian Bill stole a horse and Sandy King was just a damn nuisance. So Shakespeare closed down after a bigger town sprung up 3 miles away and the mines closed after the Depression of 1893. So it is now a historic site, preserved as a monument to the real Old West. A lot of these are out. You know, Old West. Pop up for mining, and then they're done. This is me mining now. Number 3. Burke, Idaho, USA. So mines were built in 1884 for silver and lead in Burke, and then the town was built after that. What makes this place cozy is that it is built in a canyon that at its widest measures 300 feet wide. Because of this, the railroad went directly through town and shared the way with cars. Whenever the train passed through, cars would have to pull over. When the railway expanded, it ran right through the town's hotel. A covered walkway connected 2 sides of the buildings, and it let 5 cars of the Northern Pacific Railroad pass through each day. But not everything was well and good in the cozy little town. There were tensions between the miners and the owners of the mines. In 1892, gunshots broke out between Union men and the replacement workers in the mine. The gunfight escalated and ignited a box of dynamite in one of the mills, causing 6 men to die. It got so bad that the governor of Idaho sent National Guards to Burke and declared martial law. But it didn't stop there. In 1899, when Bunker Hill Mining Company fired 17 miners for joining the Union, in response the laborers dynamited the Bunker Hill mine and more lives were lost. Then, with all of that history, plus other natural disasters like fires and avalanches, there is talk of paranormal activity in the area. Number 2. Terlingua, Texas, USA. The nickname of this town is Terlingua Ghost Town, and the motto is the Texas Ghost Town. It's also both a ghost town and not at the same time, I would say, because in the mid-1880s the discovery of cinnabar brought miners to the town, bringing the population to 2,000 people, but not much is left of those mining days. Now all that's left is a ghost town of the Chisos Mining Company and several nearby capped and abandoned mines. But also, the 2010 census set it at a population of 58 people. This is mainly due to its proximity to Big Bend National Park, so it's mainly a tourist destination. There's also reported sightings of Elvis singing at the cemetery, so it can seem like Las Vegas in the desert, I guess. More of a desert. Las Vegas isn't really a desert, you know. Last but not least, number 1, Buddville, New Mexico, USA. So Buddville was a tiny community along Route 66. It was established in 1928 by Howard Neal Bud Rice and his wife Flossie. They made many businesses and Bud cozied up to local law enforcement, but also overcharged at his auto shop and imposed fines for those caught in his speeding traps. That may have not made too many people happy. In 1967, a stranger, thought to be Billy Ray White, entered the trading post and shot and killed Bud and a part-time employee. The assailant left with $450. That day changed the nickname of Buddville to Bloodville, literally. Buddville was still occupied until 1979 when Bud's widow Flossie passed away, and so it's now a ghost town, bought and sold many times throughout the years. Even though Route 66 isn't used, it has its own exit and entrance off the interstate because he cozied up to people that much.
Starting off this countdown, we have St. Elmo. St. Elmo, originally known as Forest City, was once a very popular mining town in Colorado. They had about 2,000 people living there when the mines opened. However, in the early 1920s, the mining industry started to decline, and slowly people packed up and left. However, it's not completely abandoned. Apparently, a couple of people still live there, but it's said that this place is haunted. In fact, it's said that it is home to some of the most paranormal activity in the state. Maybe it's a good spot for paranormal investigators, but not the best area to live in. I mean, I wouldn't want ghosts for neighbors. I mean, maybe I would, if they were friendly ghosts that kept noise levels down, then sure. Moving on at number 9, we have Krakow, Italy. Krakow, Italy was founded in the 8th 8th century. However, it now lays abandoned due to a series of destructive natural disasters. The first natural disaster occurred in 1963 when a bunch of landslides affected the area. This was a result of the city being built on a cliff 1,300 feet off of the ground, and they also had some sewer and water system issues. Then in 1972, a flood struck the area and made the whole situation worse. Then in 1980, there was an earthquake that left the city completely abandoned. Now, the only people you may catch there are film crews. It's a very popular filming location. Some scenes in the film Quantum of Solace were shot there. But the area itself is considered a ticking time bomb, and it's surrounded by a locked gate. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have the city underwater. You aren't going to be able to visit this next city unless you have access to scuba diving gear, because this city is now completely submerged underwater. Built 1,300 years ago, the city I'm referring to is Shai-Chang, also referred to as Lion City, and it's located in eastern China. In 1959, the city was purposely flooded to build a hydroelectric power station. Now it's referred to as China's Atlantis. What's pretty fascinating is that although it lays about 40 meters underwater, the buildings are still in pretty good shape. The only change is instead of having human residents, it's home to tons of aquatic life. Moving on to number 7, we have Cahaba, Alabama. Cahaba in Alabama was abandoned after suffering from seasonal flooding. In 1865, Cahaba was destroyed by a flood and then abandoned. After the flood, living there became relatively impossible, so residents had no choice but to leave. But then in the 1920s, an archaeologist started to uncover and preserve some of the structures. Now it's said that the area is very haunted. In fact, it's known for a ghostly orb that can be seen floating around only to vanish into thin air. So the citizens may no longer live there, but ghosts certainly do. In our 6th spot, we have Varosha, Cyprus. In the early 70s, Varosha was one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. That was until 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus. As a result, the residents there fled for their lives. Some residents have told stories of pots being left on their stoves or things still left in their ovens. It's quite sad how they were forced out of their own home and not allowed to return. Since 1974, Varosha has been abandoned and under control of the Turkish military. The whole area is now fenced off and under constant supervision. If you try to break in, well, the army patrols have orders to shoot on sight. So don't even try to visit the city, it definitely will end badly. It's just such a shame because the area is beautiful. In fact, actress Elizabeth Taylor loved going there. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Plymouth, Montserrat. Plymouth, once the capital of Montserrat in the Caribbean, is often referred to as Pompeii of the Caribbean. Why? Well, in 1996, a volcano erupted, causing a mass evacuation. A few months later, some residents returned, but were welcomed with another eruption. On June 25, 1997, this eruption killed 19 residents and destroyed the island's airport, trapping many others from fleeing. Eventually, Plymouth was evacuated again, but this time, no one dared to return. Everything was destroyed. In fact, 80% of the town is currently covered in ash. Pictures show homes completely buried with only their roofs sticking out. It's quite sad and scary. Moving on to number 4, we have Centralia. Centralia is an abandoned town located in Pennsylvania. It was once a populated town, however, a lot of residents were forced to leave due to unsafe living conditions. This all started after a coal fire ignited underground. This fire has been burning for almost 50 years. And it's predicted to continue on for another 200 years. As a result of this fire, tons of sinkholes have formed, hot smoke is released underground, and carbon monoxide has filled some residents' basements. In some parts of the town, it's said that the ground beneath them have reached up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 400 degrees Celsius for us Canadians. Now, the US government is trying to erase any history of this city. They took away any signs directing people to this town, removed the town's zip code and forced most of the residents out, except for 7 residents that are happy living in their deadly town and refuse to move out. In our third spot, we have the Island of Dolls, aka the island I never want to visit. Located in Mexico City, the Island of Dolls is full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings. If that's not bad enough, these dolls have been there for so long that they are covered in dirt, cobwebs, and insects, making them look that much more terrifying. Now, you're probably wondering how this place came to be. Clearly, it's not Annabelle or Chucky's private island resort, though it could be. So back in the 1950s, a man named Don Julian started to hang dolls from trees as a way to protect himself against evil spirits. Paranormal things kept happening to him there, so he would hang dolls everywhere with the idea that they would scare the souls of the deceased. He spent more than 50 years hanging dolls. Some were found in the garbage, some were missing limbs. Did not matter. If it was a doll, it got hung up all around the island. Now it's abandoned and looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Coming in at number 2, we have Wittenoom, Australia. Located north-northeast of Perth, Australia, Wittenoom is considered one of Australia's deadliest towns. And you would think it would have to do with Australia's massive and deadly insects, but surprisingly not. In fact, it's because of its blue asbestos. In 1937, blue asbestos was discovered in the city's gorge. Years later, miners were unearthing tons of asbestos from the ground. It wasn't until 1978 that the government started pushing people out of their homes. They realized how deadly it was for them to be living there. It was increasing their risk for cancer. And in some cases, people were already developing lung cancer just from living there. It would cost the town about $2.43 million to rid the town of asbestos. So instead of doing that, they just shut the town down completely. In 2006, the government turned off the power to the town and had its name removed from maps and road signs. In fact, all roads that once led to the town are now closed off. If you do choose to enter the town, you will find tons of huge warning signs advising you to turn back. And in our number 1 spot, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. This is probably the most famous abandoned city on the list. So Pripyat was a city in Ukraine that had a population of 49,000 individuals. However, on April 27, 1986, all residents were forced to evacuate following the Chernobyl disaster. Pripyat was the most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster since they were the closest to the power plant. They were the ones most exposed to the radioactive chemicals. A once beautiful city was left abandoned in just 3 hours. Due to the radiation, the city will be left untouched for thousands of more years until it's safe enough to return.
At number 10, we have Garnet, Montana, USA. If I ever go to Montana, I'm gonna stick to eating steaks and walking around in the mountains. I think I'd rather run into a full-grown grizzly before I would end up in a town filled with ghosts. Well, actually no, if I run into a ghost, the worst thing that would happen is maybe it would scare me so bad I would leave a hot dookie in my fresh jeans. But a grizzly would literally turn me into hot dookie. If you want to run into the ghost of an old miner, this is probably the best place you can go visit. Garnet, Montana was built up during the gold rush, and men from all over the land with bigger dreams than brains would travel here to try and strike it rich, finding some shiny rocks. Well, we all know that eventually the gold rush dried up and Garnet, Montana didn't have much to offer after that. Now it's abandoned unless you count for the various spirits living at the residence. It's said that at certain times of day you can hear a ghost play the piano, which is probably the friendliest thing a spooky ghost can do. Oh, a ghost is like, oh, people are coming. I better play them a good tune so they know I'm not to be trifled with. And it's a hot spot for ghost lovers from all over the world. An average of 16,000 people a year come to check this place out. Someone should take a recording of that ghost piano song so Ariana Grande can mix it up and make a cool Halloween tune over it. At number 9, we have Hashima. Hashima is an island off the coast of Japan that used to be one of the most densely populated places on the planet. In the mid to late 1900s, it's thought that there were over 5,000 people living per square kilometer. The island was a hotspot because of the major major underwater coal mine. Nothing like living next to a coal mine to really strengthen your lungs. It was a booming place until 1974 when the coal mine was gone. After that, people started to leave the island in troves. Now the entire place is deserted and there's just a shell of a city. It's almost scary to look at, like it resembles something out of an apocalypse movie. For years it was forbidden for people to visit the island, but now you can do tours in select areas. The ghost stories go deep as well. My favorite is of a little girl dressed all in white who stands on the beach. No one knows what she's looking for, but people think that her family abandoned her on the island because they couldn't afford to raise her. Now her ghost waits on the shore for her family to come back. That is sad. At number 8 we have Butugaychag in Russia. The story of this town is probably the worst fate you could ever meet. Between the years of 1945 and 1955, this place was a labor camp. So if you were arrested back then, they might send you up to this place to work in a mine. Now what was in this mine? Uranium! And what is uranium? Radioactive. And what do radioactive things do to human cells? Well, they rip them apart and you die one of the most painful deaths imaginable. It's thought that over 400,000 prisoners died at this camp from the terrible conditions. Working in the mine would literally cut your life expectancy down to months. And the land was previously thought to be cursed. When it was originally found by nomadic tribes, the herd of deer died from eating the grass there. We now know that was uranium poisoning. Now it's said that the place is plagued by the thousands of souls who experienced horrible, slow radiation sickness deaths. The town is now shut down and you could go there if you want to die in a few months, but I would probably stay away. At number 7 we have Bodie, California, USA. When we're talking about ghost towns, you can bet we're gonna cover a lot of places that used to be packed with shiny rocks, especially in America. If you were in the USA back in the 1800s and you weren't trying to dig up a bunch of rocks, then what were you doing? You were a huge nerd. What, did you spend your time trying to figure out a cure for smallpox? Get out of here, you dork! Well, Bodie is a big time gold rush town. It's estimated in the late 1800s Bodie was the second largest town in all of California with around 7,000 people. It really didn't take a lot to be a metropolis back then. You just needed a well, a good saloon, and then you were set. The gold deposit was found by the patriarch of the Bodie family. He didn't get to enjoy his findings though because he died in a blizzard not long after. His family built the town and then named it after him. It's said that his ghost still haunts the land. Probably because he's so salty he never got to get rich and fat off his findings. You can visit this town. It's known as one of the best preserved ghost towns in all of America. Because of the dry climate, the buildings are in great shape. At number 6 we have Oradour-sur-Glane, France. This ghost town is the site of one of the many horrible acts carried out by the In 1944, everyone in the town was forced into buildings by These buildings were then set on fire and anyone who tried to run for safety was shot. Out of the several hundred people who lived here, only 7 people survived. How did they do this? Well, they had to cover themselves in the dead bodies of their friends and family. Now the town has never been repaired. It stands as a symbol to remember those who lost their lives in the brutal attacks by the and paranormal investigators have visited the site and they say it's plagued with tormented spirits. If you know anything about World War II history, you know that this isn't even scratching the surface when it comes to the horrific crimes committed by At number 5 we have Pyramida in Russia. This place used to be the most northern coal mine in the world, and even though it's cold as hell there and only 1,000 people live there, it was still an area under constant development. There was a hospital, schools, and a recreation center built for all the people who lived there. Throughout the 80s and early 90s, it was thought that this town would continue to grow and eventually become a winter hotspot. But the mine eventually dried up in the late 90s and everyone had to pack up and take off. The town was completely abandoned until the late 2000s when tourists started heading up there to bring a little more life to the area. Now there's 20 residents who live there only in the summertime to work at the town's only hotel. This place isn't really high on my lists of must visits. I think I'm gonna hit up Turks and Caicos and get drunk on a beach before I freeze my toes off in a former coal mining town. Also, if you do plan on visiting this winter wonderland, the only hotel in town is said to be haunted. Strange noises can be heard at night and a tall black figure has been said to walk around the perimeter of the building. At number 4 we have HELLTOWN, Ohio, USA. What a wonderful name. I heard they have an amazing cotton candy store and none of the schools have demons in them. Well, HELLTOWN is a focal point of many conspiracy theories. The land was bought by the government years ago and all the people living there were told to leave. Speculation is this happened because there was a chemical spill and the government didn't want to admit their massive screw up. Now the town is left untouched, but there are rumors that there is a giant mutated beast created by the chemical spill that walks around the area. Not really haunted, but a giant monster's in the same vein. At number 3 we have Pripyat, Ukraine. If you guys are part of the most amazing top 10 family, then you probably know I put this place on a lot of lists, but it's hard to pass it up. Pripyat is the closest city to the Chernobyl nuclear plant, and it's no wonder why it's a ghost town. Turns out people don't like dying an irradiated death. The disaster happened back on April 26, 1986, and it wasn't long after that that everyone started running in the opposite direction. Now vegetation has taken over most of the town, but there are a few residents who have returned. But why is it haunted? Well, there is the Black Crow of Chernobyl, also called the Black Demon, Winged Creature, and many other names. It's said that this thing was seen on the day of the explosion, and some people believe that the demon himself caused the reactor to explode. Now the beast stalks the land, waiting for, I guess, another power plant to be built. I don't know what it wants. At number 2 we have Port Arthur, Tasmania. There are a few places in history that you can call hell on earth, but this is definitely one of them. Port Arthur was once the site of a brutal English prison. The worst criminals in Britain were exiled to this island, and it wasn't anything like getting sent to Club Med. I can promise you there wasn't a mojito in sight. The British government would practice psychological experiments on the inmates, and this was back in the 1800s, so you can only imagine lobotomies and other horrific practices were performed there. The living conditions were so horrible that inmates would so they could get the death penalty. I mean, you could cut out the middleman and just, but to each his own, I guess. Now you can go on tours through the abandoned prison, and I don't think I need to explain to you why this place is haunted. And number 1 on our list is Poveglia, Italy. For our number 1 spot, we've picked a place that has centuries of grotesque history to go along with it. In the mid 12th century, this island was used as a place to dump people who were dying from the plague. Thousands of bodies were burned on this island, and going to the island was non-optional. If it was suspected that you had the Black Death, they sent you, and you stayed there until you suffered to death from this horrible sickness. After all this plagueness was done, it was a pretty chill spot until 1922, when a mental institution was built on the island. It's said that the head doctor would perform terrible experiments on all the people. He later went mad and the shell of the institution still stands, and you can go visit it if you want. Also, fun fact about the island, it's said to be very haunted, and there were so many people burned on the island that the soil is 50% human remains. But that's probably just an urban legend, who knows.
Starting off at number 10 are Wichita Falls, Texas. And surprisingly, there are a lot of haunted towns in the state of Texas. There are a lot on this list, and I feel like they probably make the record for most haunted towns in America. But either way, Wichita Falls is filled, and I mean filled, with haunting stories. There's a site in town called the Witch's Gate that used to be a mansion before it burned down in the 70s. After the man of the house died, his wife went a bit insane, turning to things like witchcraft to try and cope. She somehow burned the mansion down, had 2 sons with it. Another story claims the sons were robbed, and it was the thief that set the house on fire. The boys haunt the area till this day, and I'm not surprised, I'd be pissed too. Another famous one is the White Sanitarium. Presently a private residence, it used to be a mental hospital in the 20s. After the place closed down, people have seen a group of men sitting around a table playing cards, perhaps the hospital's dead old staff, I don't know. But more famously, they've seen a woman in nurse's clothes roaming the building. There's also Pinky's Cave, which is a 3-mile drainage ditch, and kids used to hang out there years ago, but now it's filled with eerie sounds and homeless people, as well as the ghost of a woman and her child who drowned inside the tunnel during a storm. Coming in at number 9 is Pluckley, Kent. Pluckley is a small village in Kent that was named the most haunted village in England by Guinness World Records in 1989. So I don't want to overhype it, but at the same time it clearly deserves the hype. It's said that 12 to 16 ghosts haunt the village and the surrounding areas. The list includes a screaming man who worked at the village brickworks and fell to his death. Another is a highwayman who was pinned to a tree with a sword. That tree was soon named Fright Corner, and that's where his ghost looms every day. The watercress woman is the ghost of a woman who used to sit on a bridge drinking gin and smoking her pipe while selling watercress. You'd assume she drowned in the river she sat near, but the reality was a lot more grim. It's said she dropped gin all over herself and accidentally set herself alight on the bridge. There's also the ghost of a principal who and was found by his students. On LV Farm, which dates back to 1406, there's the ghost of Edward Brett who in the dairy. His last words to his wife were, "I will do it," and that's what can be heard whispered around the farm. Then of course, if we're more generic, there's the white lady and the red lady, because make no mistake, there is always a white lady ghost in every list. That's 7 ghosts already, and that's not even the end of it. Based on the deaths in the list, I get the feeling there's like an external force in the village that made people slightly. That's the vibe I'm getting, I don't really know. At number 8 we have Savannah, Georgia. Apparently it's widespread knowledge that Savannah is the most haunted city in America, and thankfully I've never been. The town was given this title because literally every building in the town is haunted, like everyone. Every building has a story, every building has its own ghost. It's like Savannah is more for the ghosts than it is for the living. The Hamilton Turner Inn is home to the ghost of a man smoking a cigar on its roof, as well as little children. Whose children are they? God knows. Dubbed one of the best haunted hotels in the US because clearly that's a real category, the Marshall House was a hotel that ended up being used as a hospital thrice in its history, and thus you can imagine all the dead patients as ghosts running around. 1790 Inn and Restaurant is the home of a scorned woman called Anna who haunts the upstairs guest rooms waiting for her lost love. But why is Savannah so haunted? Let's go back in history. The town has been the site of many atrocities. The siege of Savannah that killed 240 people left people thinking unsettled soldiers still lingered there. Savannah has also been the site of a yellow fever epidemic, so that's a lot of people dead just there. In 1820 there was a massive fire in town that destroyed 500 buildings, and there was an even bigger fire 25 years prior that destroyed half that number. The people that died in those fires have been linked to the houses they occupied. And let's not forget the countless have taken place there as well. Filling our number 7 slot is Jerome, Arizona. Mining town Jerome was known as the wickedest town in the West for its brothels, gambling, and heavy drinking miners. The town itself actually burned down 3 times in 3 years at the end of the 1800s. At its peak, its population was 15,000, it then shrank to 50 people in the 50s, and currently it's 450 people. Inside the town, the Jerome Grand Hotel adds to the hauntings tenfold. Before it was a hotel, it was the United Verde Hospital where dozens of people died during the Great Spanish Influenza. Coughs, breathing, lights flicking, doors opening, a little child running on the 3rd floor either laughing or crying, it has it all. Sometimes the little ghost just stays at the foot of a guest's bed and stares at them all night. The sounds of newborn babies crying, and many guests have even spoken to the front desk about it out of concern, but then they find out it's coming from an empty room. A maintenance man named Claude Harvey was found under the elevator murdered in the 30s, and his ghost wanders around the hotel as well. There's even a ghost cat at this hotel. Can you imagine? I could go on, but I think you get the picture. Other than coming for tourism or to chase ghosts, no one really visits Jerome anymore, sadly. Now at number 6 is HELLTOWN, Ohio. Founded in 1806 and formerly called Boston, this place used to be the oldest village in Summit County. HELLTOWN was the victim of disappearing forest land when President Ford let the National Park jurisdiction expropriate land to make parks. The NPS started buying properties of locals in HELLTOWN, and they were pissed. They even wrote "Now we know how the Indians felt" all over their houses, which I feel is a bit inappropriate, but either way, that was all for nothing. The plan fell through in the end and the village was abandoned. Things went wrong in 1985 when rangers visited Kredge dump nearby and left covered in rashes and sick. Apparently the dump was highly toxic because chemicals were never disposed of properly. There's also the issue of the Satanist church, equipped with upside down crosses and all. Human and animal sacrifices even took place there, and that's not all. There was even an escaped mental patient in the woods in the town that a bus full of children, and that bus is still there, haunted by the ghost's murdered past. There's even a mutated snake in the town known as the Peninsula Python, so it's safe to say the town lives up to its name and has way too much going on. Coming in at number 5 is Granbury, Texas. This one's a bit of a small one. In 2010 their population wasn't even 8,000, so I mean it's an intimate little town. But regardless of that, it's been the home for many infamous people over the years. Davy Crockett's wife Elizabeth moved there post the Texas Revolution, and Jesse James is even buried in the city of Granbury Cemetery. Billy the Kid apparently moved there too after faking his own death. But the biggest haunted appeal of Granbury is John St. Helen. He moved there in the 1870s to teach and would quote Shakespeare all the time. But people think John St. Helen was actually John Wilkes Booth, the man who assassinated Abraham Lincoln. Apparently he died in a bar fire and police threw Booth's body into the Potomac River. Others say he was assigned a new identity after the in town he walked with a strange limp and had a southern accent, so people were wary of him. On his deathbed he did confess to a priest that he was in fact John Wilkes Booth and told him where he could find the gun that killed Abe. But he didn't die that day. He fled the city, but it's said that when he did finally die wherever that was, he came back to Granbury. The Granbury Opera House is haunted by him now, and you can hear him quoting Shakespeare all the time. Some things never change. At number 4 is Galveston, Texas. This island city's residents are so used to seeing ghosts around that honestly, they don't even bat an eyelid anymore. During the early 1900s, the city opened the Galvez Hotel to honor military leader Bernardo de Galvez, and they commissioned a giant portrait of him to go in its lobby. Soon after the Galvez Hotel opened its doors, guests started complaining this painting would make them feel extremely cold and that his eyes would just follow them everywhere. The hotel is also haunted by a ghost bride who's been seen many times in room 501. It's said she after finding out her fiancé died at sea, but to make matters worse, he didn't even die. He came to the hotel looking for her and for the marriage that would never be. There was also a storm in 1900, which is still considered the deadliest storm in US history that killed 8,000 residents. Mayfield Manor served as a morgue after the storm, and it's now haunted all year round, 24/7, around the clock. Dash Beardsley does ghost tours of the city, and he said he's seen them with his own eyes. Among his many stories is one of an office in town that called every night. The police have gone there countless times to find the office empty and no telephone even connected. Another story is the ghost of a salesman who died inside Madame Harvey's brothel in the 1800s. A police chief moved his body to a park and made it look like he was, feeding pigeons, and put him on a bench so it would be less embarrassing for his family, and the man's ghost is still looking for his car keys. Filling our number 3 slot is Jefferson, Texas. That's 3 towns in Texas in a row now. I really wasn't lying when I said Texas takes the cake on this list. It's been dubbed one of the most haunted towns in the South by many travel channels, and I know it sounds like I'm saying this is one of the most haunted towns ever for every single number, but it's true. Either way, the town is plagued by the apparitions haunting the Jefferson Hotel and the Excelsior House. Let's start with the hotel. There's a staircase inside which is known to be haunted by a little ghost that likes pulling hair and tapping guests' shoulders. Guests have been locked inside their hotel rooms and bathrooms for ages before being let out, whilst hearing a creepy laughter from the other side of the door. Orbs also appear in photos taken inside the hotel, and all this isn't even scaring me, it's just making me feel annoyed for the guests who have to stay there. Not my problem. Not my problem. Anyway, the Excelsior House is another hotel that's basically just as haunted. It houses a headless ghost on the 2nd floor, so might want to avoid that, and it even houses a woman in black carrying a baby. The ghost apparently even spoke to Steven Spielberg in the 80s, and so she got closer to my dreams of becoming an actor than I have, and she's dead. Great. Now at number 2 is Kerrville, Texas. This town is specifically known for 2 haunted buildings whose ghosts seem to go all around the town all the time. The first is Kerr County Courthouse, where 2 tragedies took place. The first was to do with a couple. The man asked his beloved to marry him, and she said no. So naturally, in a fit of jealousy and rage, he and then right in front of the courthouse. Talk about unable to deal with rejection. Man up, boy. Both have been seen over 100 times at the courthouse and the surrounding area, just milling about. Honestly, I'd be so mad if I was the girl, honestly. Like I said, I didn't want to marry you, and now I'm stuck in this afterlife purgatory with you. Just my luck. Anyway, the second story involves a prisoner who is during a rough interrogation, and he too haunts the inside of the building by banging on the bars and throwing papers about. Now the second building is Delaney Hall in Shriner University. From its name you can probably guess that it's a dorm building at the university, and it's haunted by 8 former students while living students still reside there. The students see doors slamming when the ghosts have fights with one another, and construction workers constantly complain about how their tools go missing because of the ghosts. And finally, at number 1 is Saratoga, Texas. The Light of Saratoga is the legend of mysterious lights appearing and disappearing on Bragg Road that all residents know. The road runs between Beaumont and Livingston and is next to the ghost town of Bragg Station. A haunted road and a ghost town, what a match made in heaven. So strange lights on roads have been featured in many other videos, so this phenomenon is nothing new. Some think it's simply swamp gas, but the most popular story behind it is that a railroad worker was during a railway accident, and the light comes from the lantern his ghost carries as he looks for his head. Honestly, if he's survived this long without his head, I don't really think he needs it. The second explanation for the lights is a ghostly couple. It said the newlyweds were on their way home on the road when they were stopped by an innocent looking man on the side of the road. However, the man was not innocent at all. He had a gun and a knife and took the man's wife hostage into big thicket forest and then disappeared. The man was ordered to wait in the car till they disappeared, otherwise he waited and then ran into the forest trying to follow their sounds, but he was too late. So it said the lights on the road are him trying to find his bride's murderer. Love never dies, you guys. Your fiance may be murdered, but your love never dies.